Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. It is Friday, July 3rd. A pretty quiet day as far as soccer goes, which is a nice change of pace, but we do have 5 EPL games tomorrow, including a 2-game main slate. DK deciding not to do the staggered start times, which has seemed to dampen interest in the past. So I think it was a good call going with the 2-game slate, and that's what I'm going to cover today. So that'll be kicking off at, I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning on 4th of July. Happy 4th to everyone stateside, which I think is the majority of you, perhaps a few watchers from the UK and Canada. Anyway, let's get into breaking down this slate. We got some odds changing as we're looking at it live here, but 2-game slate. You've got Leicester City, Crystal Palace. Leicester City a minus 150 favorite in this one, about 3/4 of a goal favorite. The total sitting between 2 and 2.5 right now. And then Manchester United a huge favorite here, minus 650. They're favored by 2 goals. So implied to score 2.5 in this match. And just a huge dichotomy between Manchester United and Bournemouth. United are on a 15-game unbeaten run, chasing down Chelsea for that 4th spot in Champions League football. And then Bournemouth on the other end of the spectrum here, right in the relegation battle, are winless in 3 matches. Since the restart, they've just been a dumpster fire. So in terms of form, could not be more different between these two teams. And for that reason, we're expecting United to just smash Bournemouth here. Leicester City, Crystal Palace. Leicester City still sits 3rd in the Premier League table, but they are winless since the restart. And Palace are a capable side here. So, I think a minus 150 favorite makes a lot of sense here, but I would not count Palace out of this game. They're capable of kind of hanging with a Leicester side that hasn't looked great and also has some injury concerns, which I will jump right into now. So let's go over the predicted lineups here. Bournemouth. So, I just, as a general rule here, I'm not that interested in Bournemouth exposure. Because I think they're going to get pounded by United. With that being said, there could be some value options from Bournemouth, and we're going to need that if we want to jam in a bunch of Man United players. So one of those guys is going to be Lloyd Kelly at fullback. He is min price again, 2.5K on DraftKings. Do not expect much at all from him, but I would be playing him for the sole purpose of opening up salary elsewhere. Because he is, if he does start, going to be the cheapest starting player on the slate. So I think there's definitely an argument to be made to using him. The thing I would be most interested in is if Junior Stanislas starts over here in place of Danjuma. If he does start, he's 3,200 and would likely step into a primary role on set pieces for Bournemouth. Again, not expecting much from Stanislas, probably only going to get 65 minutes. But this is a 2-game slate with limited options, and we need salary savings somewhere. So I do like Stanislas as a play. All right, next up, Crystal Palace. I don't believe this has been updated. Yeah, it hasn't been updated since Tuesday. This will probably be updated later on the day and Friday, so it is worth checking back. But what I can tell you is that Christian Benteke has been deemed healthy. That likely means that Ayew slides out here, Townsend goes to the bench, and then Benteke plays centrally. So I think that's probably the only change you're going to see with Crystal Palace there. All right, next, Manchester United. Oh, just kidding. I skipped Leicester. Okay, Leicester. So this is another one where we're going to see an update. Apparently, James Maddison, he had a hip injury. He played 45 minutes off the bench last match. Apparently, he aggravated that injury, and now he's questionable to play. So That's obviously going to be huge on this slate because he is priced up at 10.1K, just behind Bruno Fernandes. So I do not think Maddison is going to start this match. Even if he does, there is a very real possibility that he's limited by this hip injury, or that he comes off early because of it. So I do have some concerns with James Maddison here. I think the remainder of the Leicester lineup, you're going to see Justin and Chilwell as the fullbacks. But in terms of the rest of these guys, like in the midfield positions, Vardy will be there. But does Iheanacho start up front with him? Very possible. If Iheanacho does not start, then maybe you see players like Barnes and Albrighton in the wide positions. It's really hard to predict because Brendan Rodgers could change up a lot of things given how poorly they've been performing. So this is going to be a very important lineup to monitor pre-lock, especially if Maddison's out, because in that case, the set pieces could go to another player like Albrighton, like Tielemans. Chilwell could take more. Damari Gray could take if he's on. So just a few things to look out there for. Finally, United. We're going to see United's best 11, in my opinion, because they need to win every game to maximize their chances of reaching the Champions League spots. So, they've got James predicted to be a starter here, but this could very well be Mason Greenwood again. Obviously, let's just get right into the salaries here, and we can start by looking at United. So, we could have Martial, Rashford, and Greenwood all starting, and of this bunch, Rashford's got the highest floor. Greenwood's attractive at the lowest price. Martial, the lowest floor. But if we're talking, if you're going to play in that 40K GPP, Martial probably is going to have the lowest ownership of these three because people are going to gravitate towards Rashford because of the floor. People will gravitate towards Greenwood because he had a really nice game last game and because he's the lowest price of these options. So then I think Martial goes overlooked in GPP, could provide a lot of leverage. In a vacuum, he's the worst play, in my opinion, out of those three. But that's another reason his ownership will probably be depressed. And we just saw him score a hat trick 2 matches ago, so we know exactly what he is capable of. So I think there's a lot of potential leverage there. But look, if Danny James starts at 4,800, that's really cheap exposure to the United attack. Paul Pogba, only 5,600, definitely underpriced there. And then, of course, Bruno Fernandes is going to have a ton of ownership, and for good reason. He combines an awesome floor and an awesome ceiling that nobody on this slate can match. In defense, we're probably going to see Bissaka and Luke Shaw again. Luke Shaw just has not been doing much from a DFS perspective, so not a big fan of him. Bissaka is a guy that I used to avoid because he was more of a defensive-minded player, but if you take a peek at his game log, he's been getting forward and crossing a lot more. He's had a really solid floor, so I think there's a lot of reason to like Bissaka here. To quickly touch on Bournemouth, there's Lloyd Kelly at 2,500, and then there's Stanislas at 3,200. If he is in, he would likely have set pieces, so that's attractive at that price. If Stanislas does not start, then maybe you get Danjuma at 3,500. A decent punt, but he's 300 more, and you're not getting set pieces, so less attractive to me. All right, this is where it will get really interesting. So we have James Maddison up here, but you see the questionable tag. So if he is out, that opens up a lot of opportunity. And let me say this. Crystal Palace allow a ton of crosses and corners won. So that sets up perfectly for a player like Maddison if he did start. But again, I do have those concerns about his minutes and the injury. Now, if a guy like Mark Albrighton's in, he crosses even more in open play than Maddison, and he did take corners last match. So Albrighton, a very interesting play if Maddison fails to start. I really like Chilwell at 6,400. It's just going to be difficult to fit him in a lot of builds. Now, you could even see Demarai Gray in at 5,100 without Maddison and without Albrighton. In that scenario, he probably splits corners with Tielemans, and I'd rather play Gray for just $100 more because of the upside. He'll be playing in a more attacking role. So definitely some interesting Leicester options. Of course, if you're not going to pay up for two forwards from United, there's Jamie Vardy at 7,400. No, he does not have a floor, but he's a leading scorer in the league. So he's a guy that, while he hasn't looked great lately, he could turn it on at any time and pick up a brace. And he could be somewhat overlooked because he's not playing for Manchester United, who are the huge favorite here. All right, let's move over to some Crystal Palace guys. So, Ayew and Zaha are interesting forward options as well if you don't want to take two from United. The thing I will say about Ayew is he's more attractive if Benteke starts, because then he moves out to the wing and that boosts his floor a bit more. Either way, he's been outperforming Zaha, and that's why you see the price difference there. Elsewhere, if Benteke does not start, then you get Townsend again, probably at 4,500. A nice value in terms of the floor he provides at that price, and he does fill a forward spot. Outside of that, nothing really jumps out. I mean, this might even be a slate where you end up taking a guy like Gary Cahill for some salary savings. Just before I leave you here, just kind of some overall thoughts on strategy. A 2-game slate, I like to treat basically like a showdown slate. And what I mean by that is, variance is very much in play, where it's just 2 matches here. There's optimal plays like Bruno Fernandes and maybe even like a Paul Pogba at his price. But just because they're optimal plays does not mean that they are going to hit. The goals could come from anywhere, especially with United. They're a huge favorite, but it's just one game. So who knows where those goals are going to come from. And that's why, when you look at comparing Rashford, Martial, and Greenwood, well, guess what? Any one of them could pop up with a brace. So this is where I think thinking about game flow and thinking about ownership become very important if you are going to play in a big GPP like that main 40K GPP. Now, if you're playing in a single entry, smaller field, then you definitely want to lean more towards, what is optimal. So based on everything I know right now, I think it looks like a situation where you might want to go with a capture method with United, because, if James Maddison is starting, I think there's a lot of merit to using him in a cash build, just because, he and Fernandes have 2 of the top floors in the entire EPL for DK scoring. So maybe you just slot both of them in and then work from there. But with the injury concern to Maddison, I think there is a definite angle here of just fading Maddison and just getting as much United exposure as possible. I think that could certainly work out here. But to go back to this larger field tournament, thought process and strategy, the way I like to think about it is you don't want to think about what is most likely. You want to think about what is possible, even if it's a lower probability, and then how you could leverage it, because that's how you end up at the top of one of these big GPPs, and they are so top heavy that's honestly where you need to end up or be aiming for, as your overarching strategy in the long run to make money in these tournaments. So, you got to think about what the field's going to be doing and then how you could differentiate. So just a couple ways to think about it. Maybe you have a match where United pile on goals early from the forward position. So we're talking about Martial, we're talking about Rashford, we're talking about Greenwood. Well, in that scenario, maybe Bruno Fernandes, who is highly owned, doesn't have to do a whole lot, and then maybe he comes off at 64 minutes like he did last match because Ole wants to preserve him for this Champions League push. And so he ends up being a rather poor play at his salary. So there would be a ton of leverage in, picking up two of those United forwards, maybe putting in De Gea, the high-priced goalkeeper, and then, just picking up some floor plays from the Leicester game. Now, you could spin that just the other way. Maybe all those United forwards don't score because Fernandes and Pogba get the only goals for United. So then, in that scenario, your leverage would be in finding forward goals elsewhere. So maybe it's a Jamie Vardy. Maybe it's Jordan Ayew. Maybe it's Kelechi Iheanacho from Leicester if he starts. So that's just kind of the thought process that you want to go through to gain leverage in these larger field tournaments. So something to think about there. I think, let me touch on goalkeeper because I know people often like to ask about it. Look, goalkeeper is probably the highest variance position, and it's a 2-game slate, so who the hell knows? But what I will say is, if I could pay up for De Gea, that's lovely because I just do not see any scenario where United do not win this match. Of course, we just saw Chelsea lose to West Ham the other day, so, shit can happen, but I think it's a very, very low probability that Man U loses the match. So if I can pay up for him, great. I just don't know that spending $6K on a goalkeeper is optimal on this slate, especially when you want to get exposure to the goals from United. So, one thing a lot of people will look to do on this type of slate is just pay all the way down for goalkeepers. So that would be Ramsdale. But in that same line of thinking, if you think United are just going to crush Bournemouth, maybe you don't want to go for Ramsdale. And his game logs are scary. I mean, he's got a couple negative games there in the past 4. I am much more likely to pay up for Guaita, or Gaeta, however you say his name. Look at his game logs. He hasn't gone below 4. And then he's got that huge ceiling, possible 26 there. So I am much more apt to pay up for Guaita or Gaeta, whatever it is. Regardless. And then there's Kasper Schmeichel, a very solid keeper. And he's only 400 less than De Gea, which I think will lead a lot of people just to say, okay, if I'm at 5,500, I'm going to find a way to get to De Gea instead just to be safe, which I think makes Schmeichel a very interesting GPP keeper, especially if you're playing in that 40K GPP. There'll be a ton of leverage if he ends up as the highest scoring keeper. And, if you want to play correlation, then maybe you pair him with Jamie Vardy. Vardy scores a goal to take the lead. Then Palace are trying to score, can't break through. Schmeichel makes a bunch of saves, gets that win and that clean sheet bonus. I think some interesting angles on keepers there. All right, that's going to do it, guys. Thank you for tuning in. If you are new to the channel, I will be pumping out these videos, trying to give you guys all of the relevant information and kind of the angles that I'm looking at, so you can hopefully win some money out there. So if you are new, please subscribe. If you're returning, thanks for tuning in again, and I will see you guys next time. Good luck.